I mean, well, independence being like understanding things for yourself, it would imply something of clarifying concepts where appropriate and necessary.
Right. But that's not something that immediately stands out
Yeah, probably
is
doesn't.
what I'm saying. Okay, I
Yeah,
just put it on the recording, by the way.
that's fine.
Cool. Yeah, so where were we yesterday? We were talking about
Yeah,
you were explaining that basically that they're both arbitrary rather than looking at the body. They've just gone to um, make guesses basically
yeah.
about
Like one guy just went the easiest answer that's common. The other one went like, well, I don't want the common answer theory. I want this more complex theory because I don't, for whatever reason, he prefers that. But neither of them began with like, oh, the evidence points to this, so this is where we should begin. Neither of them said either such thing.
yeah.
And in a way, it almost mentions the other guy's an atheist. It mentions the the commissioner, whatever his name was,
No, he's a
saying that he's
Christian.
which one's the Christian?
Yeah, here, look,
Me,
I highlighted. So from what I got, this
okay.
is Lonro says
Oh
all
right.
this about all the books he's reading. Um, the commissioner gazed at them with
Oh,
suspicion,
you're
almost
right.
with, I'm only a poor Christian. Yeah, so,
Yeah, he's just being the commissioner, just going more like the easy answer. He's not really introspecting on is this a good answer or anything. Just like he's a Christian because it's like, well, I'm reading into it perhaps, but either way, they're neither of them are really going on a basis for their theory. They just went with their gut or instinct, perhaps.
right. It's a bizarre story. Like I didn't quite get,
It is
I thought there
strange.
might be something that I will get about like what, obviously it makes no sense for him to say maybe this crime belongs to the history of Jewish superstitions. I was like, I thought there was going to be
Yeah.
some big punchline or something at the end, but it
Well,
didn't.
in a way, it's not really obvious what the problem is here. Like I always when I was reading it, I was expecting it's like this is a standard detective story. He has this weird theory. He does the research. It turns out he's right, and everybody's happy. But no, he's dead at the end. He's just dead. He fails and loses, and he got
Right,
the wrong answer. Like
right.
I never see that. And it was
Yeah.
actually pretty interesting.
What's this, by the way? So the guy says I'm a poor Christian, and then the editor of the Yiddish newspaper says like
Yeah.
Christianity when he says maybe this crime belongs to the history of Jewish superstitions. What did he mean by that? Do you know?
Well, one he's making. Well, he's saying Christianity's kind of stupid. Like it's a superstition. I'm not sure really the value of that statement. He's saying like Christianity is
Oh,
a myth. He's making fun of it too.
oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, so he was an atheist. The guy edited the.
The
Okay.
editor, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but nobody seems to really listen to him. Like I don't know, maybe he's the only one that's rational, but nobody cares about him. Like I'm not sure why Borges threw in that line. It doesn't seem relevant later.
Right. Hmm. Um. Yeah. Anyway, so he finds that thing, the first letter of the name. I thought these were all clues, but
Well, that's
um.
what they thought. Like
Right.
that's what they first started. That's what he first looked at and paid
Right.
attention to. Oh, this spooky, weird letter. What could that mean? Now he's reading everything about like this Jewish superstition that he can. I mean,
Yeah.
as in even the really out there stuff like Kabbalah and all that other stuff.
Okay, so yeah, he became a bibliophile. Is reading. Um,
Yeah, and even the editor keeps making fun of him. It's like
yeah, he
this is
says to
stupid.
come up. He says to come up with the name of the assassin. Although you know what? He declared in 3 columns, and he's given it its own little.
Yeah,
He's commented that. So I thought that was a clue originally, but
yeah, but in a way, it's like making fun of him. It's arbitrary connections, like a
okay.
very subtle way to make fun of him. He's making fun of both the Christian and Lonrod.
I wonder what. Let's see. I'll bring up wiki thing after. Okay. Um, history. Yeah, I didn't know what the hell was going on half of it with like one of the shopkeepers came out with a history of the sect of Hasidim, and I was like, I don't know what's going
Yeah,
on there.
it's kind of more like tangential stuff. If it's interesting, maybe if you like this way Borges talks, but the point of it is like there's these weird connections, and Lonerat's trying to make a big theory about why would a prominent Jewish thinker be murdered. So he's trying to come up with a rabbinical explanation, as he said.
Right. This is just so weird. Okay.
Yeah.
So then this guy, Daniel Simon Azevedo, gets killed. Where was this based? In Spain, the story, or in Russia or
I
something?
I'm not positive. I want to say this one was Spain, but let me check because you just Zeitung sound like a even Germany.
In the story, I'm just looking up
I
Wikipedia.
think it's Germany actually,
Uh,
but written in Spanish because Monra I think is a German name, and Trevor Rana sounds German.
okay. We'll look at the wiki. Will be interesting. Actually, I'll bring it up after. So, all right. So there's this guy called Azevedo, who was a thief.
Yeah.
He's a risen from a wagoner to political tough, only to become a thief. All right, so
Yeah.
there's that thief guy, and the singular
Yeah.
style of his death struck them as appropriate. Azevedo was the last representative who knew how to handle a dagger, so he was stabbed. All right, second letter of the name has been
Yeah.
spoken, and then these things keep happening on the third.
Yeah.
Let's see what.
The patterns.
Okay. Yeah. So that was Griffius. All right. So then he found there's this in a cabinet, a book in Latin, the philologist, whatever that is, 1739.
Yeah. Trying to go into the meaning of these Jewish ideas. That's what he's
Right.
doing.
At 4 a.m, they came out in the tortuous rue, as they, whatever that is. Yeah, I didn't quite get this. Lonro smiled and read him with due gravity a passage of the 33rd dissertation, whatever the hell that is, that the Hebrew day begins at sundown and lasts until the following sundown. I didn't understand what that, like, what was, because that came up at the end too.
He's noticing the pattern of threes now. There's threes everywhere. He's saying, oh, the answer must be in the threes. Something about these three give us the answer. Like he's picking things based on the number 3.
Right.
Whether or not Lonart doesn't believe it's like magic, but is there really any distinction? Like he's just saying the threes are the answer, basically. That everything is the guy's doing things in threes and whatnot.
Right. Do you know what he meant here of even great? So he said, so he's picked that thing of the 33rd sentence or passage. And then he says, the commissioner says, is that the best you picked up? And he's like, of even greater value is a word Ginsburg used. Do you know what he was referring to that he picked up as?
Ginsburg.
Yeah. Ginsburg was the guy who called in and gave the.
Yeah. Hold on. It's not showing your text when I maximize. Let me 1 second. Let me see if we can get it back.
Okay.
Oh, it's not showing.
Oh, it's paused. Somehow it's my screen sharing got paused. I don't know how to. Let's see how I can unpause it.
Or just close it and reopen it.
I'll just resume. I'll do it again. Let's see. Yep. Okay. Now?
Yeah, it's fine.
Cool. Yeah, of even greater value is a word Ginsburg used. What did he get caught up on with that?
I don't know which word he's referring to.
Yeah, okay, I don't know. My eyes glaze whenever I read crap like this.
Yeah, I can.
Right. Oh, so this is when they receive their envelope and it's signed by, but why do they say Baruch? I don't know. Baruch
Because
Spinoza.
it's the philosopher Spinoza. That's his full name.
Oh, okay.
So
It's with a
he's a real
J.
guy. You can J or CH, either
Yeah,
way.
cool. All right. Yeah, I wonder what, was he a rationalist, Baruch Spinoza?
He's kind of a weird guy. As far he's just not really hard. He's hard to fit in anywhere good. Some people think he's an atheist. Some say he's a pantheist. Some say he kind of believes in self-interest to a degree. He's really
Right.
complicated. Never read him
Well, I mean,
myself.
on school, it's listed as rationalism. Well, one of them, foundationalism, according to
Yeah.
Hegel, conceptualism. So, I don't know, direct realism, whatever. Anyway, so it's from
Like direct realism would
Spinoza.
be like Rand, like the world in
Oh,
front of you
okay.
is like real, not unlike Kant, who says like you can't perceive it directly. You're only receiving reality indirectly. And so Spinoza is the opposite of Kant in that regard.
Say that again, sorry.
Spinoza is, I guess, the more the realist end of things, rather than the
Oh, okay.
Kantian end.
Okay, so he gets this letter and they're saying there won't be a fourth crime, but somehow, do you know why he interpreted it as there would be a fourth crime? Because he somehow decided this is like just additional rationalistic stuff
Okay.
or something that.
So he marked the different locations, the murders, on a
Yeah.
map. Then
Right.
he used a compass and drew a circle with the 3 dots.
Right.
And by continuing the circle, he found a 4th point at a perfect shape according to those. Like he used a compass to measure it out and say this will be the next crime. He said, "Oh, this will be the 4th spot, but I know what's going to happen, so I'm going to get there before it happens and
So
stop
this
it."
is just like layer of rationalist assumptions after rationalist assumptions, right?
Yeah, like now he developed his theory so much that now he thinks I can predict the next one with this handy compass I have. Hence the name of the story, like Death in the Compass, because that's how he solved it.
He also, I think he made reference to the tetragrammaton or something, which I don't know if
Right.
that's 4 letters or.
It's Tetras 4, so it's something to do with what he was reading. I forget what that term is. Tetragrammaton.
Yeah, it's like the arrangement of the names of God. So
Yes.
there's like 90, YH, WH,
Yeah.
and all stuff like that. So anyway.
Yeah. So he does that. And he felt like, I can't believe I'm
spent
wasting
hundreds
my time.
of days where he dedicated hundreds of days to this. Okay. And he thought of the fact that only one more dawn and one more nightfall separated him from the hour so much desired by the seekers of the name.
Yeah. So he's just looking for the place,
All
easy
right,
description, and now he's captured.
Yeah. I get, all right, he was captured at the end by some red guy from another village or something like that. But
and this is what actually happened. This is now he's describing what really happened.
Right.
And it was nothing that Lonart thought it was. Lonart was like deceived the whole time and tricked practically. And it really was a murder out of kind of like passion at the moment. It wasn't planned. It was an accident.
I think it was over theft, right? They were trying to steal something.
Yeah, but it wasn't supposed to be a murder.
Right.
But then
go on.
Well, tell me your thoughts about this so far. That you got this explanation here of what went on.
Well, I was a bit confused by the end. I was like, all right, they tried to steal something and then somehow they managed to, but through all these complicated traps, they knew that he would make certain assumptions and then they decided they want to kill him. But that's all I got from the end. Yeah.
So, well, for one, Sherlock wanted revenge because Lonart captured his brother for doing something.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, that's
so he wanted revenge. he had this fever and he basically went crazy. He's going nuts and wanted to like make this his life work to kill Lone Rot.
Right.
His first objective was by chance. So they made a plan. We're going to steal this guy's sapphires, which is what the original guy even said. It was a burglary. It went wrong. Somebody died. But there is more to it. So Azevedo betrayed them, stole the sapphires, and killed Yarmolinsky and ran away. He wasn't supposed to kill Yarmolinsky. He wasn't supposed to. It wasn't the time. But then he found out, oh my God, it's Lonrod. He's doing the investigation. So then he decided, well, this is a good time for revenge. I'm going to kill Azevedo for deceiving us. And I'll kill him. And then he'll get evidence for 2 murders. And he'll just build on from there to trick Lonrod. And that's what he did. He did trick Lonrod. Got him to follow this crazy plan.
Yeah, I mean, it says here, I've woven it and it holds the materials. It holds the materials are a dead rider on heresies, a compass, an 18th century sect, a Greek word, a dagger, the ROMs of a paint shop, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all he used to trick him.
Right.
He tricked Lonrod because he knew he would be rationalizing everything, working from a theory and finding the evidence to fit the theory rather than using evidence to develop a theory.
Right.
So.
Okay. Right. So it's that is about rationalism, basically.
I would say so.
Hmm.
So he had this spectacular idea, but in reality it fell apart. And we could almost put it on. He didn't start by looking for evidence. He just went with it because he had a hunch, and his hunch was wrong, and he ended up dying because of his mistake.
What's up with Borges's like? He uses all these geometric like he writes about like symmetrical and periodic death and like let's see what else. It's all over the quadrilateral jail where my brother was drying.
It's a repeating theme throughout his short stories. He often writes about the linearity and progress of time and how it seems to loop back on itself sometimes and how there's no real continuity. It's just things repeat symmetrically sometimes. That there's a symmetry to the way time goes on and a periodicity to many things like death and whatnot. Things go in patterns and whatnot. And that's what theme is, what he's talking about. And the way how we think about these patterns affects our thinking and affects our stance towards life even.
He says at the end too, this is Lonrod speaking to him and then saying, kill me at D as you are now going to kill me at Trist Le Roy or whatever. The next time I kill you, I promise you the labyrinth made of the single straight line, which is invisible and everlasting. I don't know what's that. And then he shoots him. This is reference to that geometry stuff, right?
Yeah, I almost wonder if Borges is trying to be making fun of Lonrod here. Because look at that. Lonrod dying. He's strapped up. He killed any moment. He's going on about, well, you could have killed me a better way. It's like he's taking all that time to describe a very coherent way he could have been killed better. It's like, you should have done this. And the guy responds, okay, next time I'll do it that way. I'll just kill you that way. It's like, whatever. You went through all that and you just, it's almost goofy. But yeah, he's also describing something about like philosophers even get stuck on these questions forever and ever and ever and ever. Like the Zeno's paradox. Like,
okay.
You're splitting things in half and find a point. It's like, sure. But then you might rationalize the story anyway. Like, you can divide by half infinitely. There's no end.
This is, I brought up the Wikipedia and I'm looking at it and there's a lot of like, it does reference Zeno's paradox. So there's probably like, I think without some context, he's pretty can be pretty annoying to read him because of all these
Yes.
references.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'm looking at the Wikipedia. Okay, so appearances are misleading, however. By following what seems to be clues, the detective falls victim to his belief in abstract reason. So I think that's what it's about, because I think
Yes.
that's considered rationalism, right, in philosophy.
Yeah.
Observes. Okay, so the point is it observes and inverts the conventions of detective fiction.
Yeah.
By rather, like you said, they're not looking at the body. They're just starting by guessing stuff and then.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Interesting.
And even the
Yeah, I mean,
expectation that the detective figures it all out, or that his ingenuity is going to save the day, but his ingenuity is actually what caused the problem
right,
in this case.
right. Yeah, because he's finding reasons to support his abstract reasoning. He's finding proof, like you said, to support his. Yeah, I wouldn't have given this a chance. Like I would have otherwise. If I read this on my own, I would have read like the first paragraph and go,
Yeah.
"What is this?" and just stopped reading it. So that's cool. Okay, good. I enjoyed going over that. Let's see. Can go to virtues. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so it says pause. Let me try again. There we go.
Okay.
Now it's not paused. See it?
I see it.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, I was just curious about like how these virtues differ from whatever you've read in Aristotle. Because he says here that she's trying to go to essential virtues, but it's not exhaustive. I guess it's just a description of like parts of what rationality mean, but they're not making a claim to all virtues or something.
I'm saying she's just identifying various categories of virtue, I think. And these are usually pretty the essentials, or these the more fundamental aspects, and anything else would be like a subcategory or a sub concept of these virtues. It seems to cover why the types of measurements we're trying to get at, which is like actions that bring us flourishing and living by our nature and things like that.
Yeah.
I think you're right to say most of it's just an explanation about what it means to be rational. You're just expanding on that.
Right. Yeah, maybe that's why I find it when you read it, it appears so simple and difficult. Like it's not then obvious what does that actually mean right now in this moment? What do I do with these virtues?
Right.
Because they're so broad.
And the way Aristotle approached virtue was more like just taking an example of a person that you define as good and then seeing what they do, which kind of begs the question, because how do you know that's actually a good example?
Right.
Like it's kind of based on the way society is already. So he's not really looking at virtues per se as much as virtues as viewed by the Greeks. He's taking for granted that how his culture came up with these various virtues. He tries to relate it to the way the world is, and he tries to look at even moral virtues. He distinguishes between intellectual virtues and moral virtues, and he seems to put more weight on intellectual virtues. It's hard to specify what those are, but it's like wisdom, certain things like that.
Right. Yeah.
But he is like, because he uses the golden mean. He tries to like two extremes of behavior and find the middle ground, or at least somewhere between both of those things. Like you don't act rash, but you don't act cowardly, but you act somewhere in between, and that's courage.
Did he did he come up with the golden mean through observation of people, or did he? Is it Lonrot style golden mean, and then it sounds like he tried to first look at people, and then maybe he came up.
Yes. Yeah, I would say he just looked at people first. He may have taken for granted what it is, the people he picked, but he was at least trying to pick something from the world in front of him rather than having the theory first and then having examples, because he really guides you through the thinking he has in the book in Nicomachean and Ethics. But that's like for like halfway through. Like he already goes about distinguishing happiness and pleasure by the time he talks about the virtues.
Right. I feel like it might be valuable to. I enjoyed going over the Apology, and it might be valuable to keep reading Plato and some Aristotle, because like a lot of what I'm reading in OPA is just everything is given to you, and you might still be stuck on like, well, how did we even come up with virtue and like uh, and more basic questions which you don't even have. I think you can maybe explore those first, but anyway, it's still good.
Yeah. My own way of thinking about this, I read Nicomachean Ethics. Yeah, I read Objectivist Ethics by then, but I was still thinking about what objectivist virtues are. So by reading Aristotle, I think it helped me understand what Rand is trying to answer and how she differs from even Aristotle.
Right.
And it helped me, I think, like at least
Right.
thinking of how a philosopher has done this in the past.
How detailed of a reading have you done of Aristotle's books, and which ones? Just so I know if I do decide to go through.
Personally, I've only did Nicomachean Ethics and Poetics.
Okay, I will see. I will. I don't know if I'm gonna go through all, but
Poetics is kind of short. Like Poetics
okay.
is like 60 pages.
Oh, really? That's okay. That's definitely doable then. Poetics, only 60 pages. I would have thought that's a whole.
Less than 100.
Oh, that's easy.
Something like that.
All right, cool. Maybe we'll add that because I've gone through so much of the art stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he says to identify the essentials of rationality. So would you, just trying to apply this, everything I've learned about concepts, would you say that the virtues are instances of rationality, or they're kinds of rationality? Like I'm just keep trying to get my head around, is it like what is it? Is it an aspect? Is it rationality? Like, yeah.
Well, when I say instance, I mean a concrete example. When I use the word instance, that's what I mean. And yeah, I would say the wider genus is rationality. Yes, I would prefer that category.
Right.
It's hard
So
to
it is
say
a kind of rationality.
Yeah, rationality seems right as a broader, or we could just say even virtue is the category. But I like to say that these things are a type of rationality, or yeah, it's a distinction, ways of being rational.
So here are the virtues, and I haven't read through all of them in detail. I've read up to like, I think, productiveness, but as they stand in my mind when I read through this, it just seems so obvious to the point that like I don't even, you know what I'm saying? Like there's something missing in the way I'm thinking about it. Like independence, okay, think for yourself. Integrity, act on your, if you think something is right, act on it. Honesty, don't lie to yourself. Justice, judge people. Productiveness, you must work in order to survive. Pride, keep working on yourself and your flaws. But if it's held like that in my mind, it's not like in any given moment or day I'm necessarily noticing, am I acting in a virtuous way? Like, do you know what? It just seems too obvious. Basically, that has been my problem so far with this section.
You're right to say that the genus is rationality. I think you're right to say that, and that can be what helps you to say they're not just these random parts that might not have a relationship to each other. You're trying to say that you're using this same standard of measure to look at all these things, and you're trying to apply rationality to those things. Like why is independence about rationality? I mean, yeah, think for yourself, but in what way is that related to rationality? I mean, how does that imply anything about rationality? Like, why not just think for yourself and that's it? Why do you need rationality? Like, what?
What do you mean? What I didn't. Why not? Could you repeat that?
Well, if independence is a type of rationality, you would have to be you would be able to ask yourself, what about independence has anything to do with rationality? Like, if I think for myself, why do I need to be rational about it? Means what's that imply? Or why should independence imply rationality? Things like that.
Oh, okay. Because I think because to reason, part of what reasoning is thinking, and uh, reason only is an attribute of an individual. This is just from what I remember, right? It's not a fully fleshed out thing, but reason is an attribute of the individual, which I agree with. And so, because it's only you can choose to reason, and reason is how you survive. Um, part of that is being what's called independent, thinking for yourself. It just emphasizes that. But
Yeah, and
that
then you
seems,
could.
you know what I'm saying? Like that seems, when I think that, it just seems so simplistic. Like I'm all right. Well, then
It
what do I do
is.
with that? What do I do with that day to day?
Well, I mean, some common examples like, well, imagine you didn't think for yourself that you didn't. Somebody told you something to do, and you didn't question it. In certain instances, like if would you be independent thinking if somebody tells you the right thing to do is this, and you do it? Like if they tell you like become a doctor and you do, I mean, it might seem valuable, but it's not really
Yeah,
independent because you're not thinking, you're using them to think. So what
yeah,
would it mean for you to think, to have somebody else think for you? Like what would that imply for your life? What would that do to your life? And can't you think of cases where it has happened to people where they didn't
yeah.
think for themselves?
Well, I mean, that example I gave you earlier is where I realized like, yeah, there's way more to this that I don't have that I'd like to have. So, for example, with independence, if you use a concept and you use it vaguely and you haven't thought it through yourself, that's dependence because someone came up with that concept. You didn't, and you didn't validate it for yourself. So you're, in that sense, you're dependent. But I didn't even think of that as because see, that's suddenly adding so much more depth to the idea. Whereas before, that's not even something I would have come up with. I just heard that and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. So I know there's more depth, but at the moment where I'm at is I'm not seeing it that much. Like the example you gave, yeah, if you give me an obvious example, like
Right.
your dad tells you you should be a mango farmer, and and you decide, yes, I will be a mango farmer because that's what my dad says I should do. Okay, but not there's less and less of that today, right? So
Yeah.
um, it is it's trickier because it seems like these are just very easy to follow and but I know they're not, and because it doesn't stand in my head that clearly. So that's all I got so far. But I mean, that's why I got all these questions, right? Because I'm just trying to
Yeah.
really understand it in depth. Can you
I,
think of any other? Yeah, sorry, go on.
I'm thinking that at least keep in mind that, or keeping in mind that the genus is rationality helps at least see how to integrate these things together. Is that they
Okay.
all must relate to rationality, and you could even relate them to each other. Like, what would it, if you were not independent, what would that say about all the other virtues? Because it's affecting your rationality overall. Like, one irrational thing should affect everything else to some extent. If they're
Right.
all a genus, if the genus is rationality, it should affect rationality across the board. So we can think of other examples of independence. We can think of, say, people who come up with a new theory on in some field, like so, say somebody who came up with the Nobel Prize. You could think of that as an example of independence because by nature you have to come up with something new, something innovative, and you can
Right.
think about what did that entail about that those people or that person. like you would do research on them, like what was about them was showed integrity, honesty, and justice. Or you could look at were they independent? You could consider um, to what extent did they evaluate what was before them rather than just swallow it whole without consideration. You're right
Right.
that you should ask about, like, well, to what extent is independent to um, believe somebody, like, that somebody tells you about, I don't know, about how frogs evolved. Like, I've never seen a frog evolve. I've never done the research. I've never, or even if I was a
Mm,
biologist, I
right.
probably didn't look at the exact evidence everyone else looked at. Like, I didn't look at the frog eggs, or I didn't examine the DNA strands myself. So that's a complicating thing. But those are more like sub questions, like how do we measure this? Because I'm unsure of how I will. It's not a major question because you might not run into that very often. Usually, the things that matter about independence are usually more fundamental things, but I think it's fine to ask about. Like, if you're a researcher, to what extent do you need to check things out yourself? Very difficult.
Well, I guess it does. Yeah, I think maybe once you start getting into the application, that's when you can flesh it out in more detail because, yeah, I can see how, like, we're taking about if you take over another concept without thought and you take over it by association, that's dependence because someone else came up with the concept. But that doesn't necessarily mean, if I need to validate, if someone tells me about a theory in physics, I need to go into a university lab, break in and go set up the cyclotron and start doing all these tests. But yeah, there's more to it.
Yeah, including how you direct your consciousness. I mean, if you're trying to, if you tell yourself, I don't want to think about it, I'll just do what this person does, that would probably be dependence. But if you know they're not trying to, or they're just trying to weigh the evidence or judge the evidence very carefully, or it's difficult, but they don't want to just ride somebody else's mind, or that one is, that wouldn't be as bad, or maybe it wouldn't be bad at all, because you have to consider their frame of mind. I mean, because even rationality is connected to volition, of course. So, I mean, whether you're blameworthy or not depends on what way you've chosen to direct your consciousness. So that's a further consideration.
Yeah. What do you when you say frame of mind? Because I've seen you say that elsewhere. Do you mean like a set of beliefs or
Um, where you direct your actions towards. Like, if you're honestly trying to think for yourself and um, figure things out, but and wanting you to think rationally, that's different than somebody who says, like, independence be damned, I don't care. I'm just going to do what is easier. Like, I'm just going to write off your ideas and that's it. I mean, it's a different of attitude in regard of how they're
oh,
using
okay.
their mind.
So maybe frame of mind is like attitude towards its beliefs, but it's also attitudes towards, or it's also if they choose to act on reason or emotion.
Yeah. Or are they even considering rationality, for instance? Because
Right.
you have to choose it volitionally. It has to be
Right.
a choice. And if you don't even
Right.
choose it, that's probably worse than you choose it, but you mess up.
Right.
There's a difference there.
Okay, let's see. I tried to dissect this whole thing because I'm like, it just seems so simple. So maybe we'll skip some questions. We'll see when I get into it. All right, so you can survive by the independent of work of your own mind and a parasite fed by the minds of others. See, I would not have thought at all about concepts here, but it totally applies. The creator originates, the parasite burrows, the creator features nature alone. All right. Yeah, and what you said about how it relates to rationality is interesting. I wouldn't know quite where to go with that yet, but I can see how, like you're saying that if you act incorrectly, or if you don't act according to one aspect, that has a kind of redounding effect on everything else, right?
Yes,
Yeah, I
because
wouldn't
they
know
all
how
have
to. Yeah,
the esteem one of the same measurements across all of them. They both measure rationality in
right,
some way or another. So
right,
if they all measure it to some degree, like rationality in another regard will somehow impact the others because
right.
they're all measuring like some aspect of the same thing.
Mm. Yeah, I guess this is. We can skip this question because I wasn't sure. I mean, primary matter is obviously what he's concerned with primarily. Get that, but let me cross that. But this is maybe I'd need to reread Fountainhead or something to get at more. It's hard to like relate this sometimes to actual practice. At least for me, it is like because I can't think of anyone who's a second. Like when I think of the label second hander, I can't actually think of anyone who's a second hander. And I can't think of, nothing comes to mind like, I did that and that was secondhand, which to me should be a warning bell because like if I can't think of anything, I don't know if I'm not, it's not like I'm 100% virtuous because I haven't even given thought to the virtues. So there's no way. And yet when I think, where have I been secondhand? It's not always obvious, right? So there's something like there is a warning sign there to me. If that's why I probably copied this passage.
Second hander examples. Um, that one's a bit harder. I think there are not that many examples day to day. I think you can find them historically, but it's hard
Right.
to say, do I see them very often? I think it's something you see more often in literature, I think, as if it's like a real conflict people feel. Sometimes everything people see, sometimes in the most deepest conflicts, maybe. Like, I guess I can think of, who could I think of? I guess some intellectuals I might think are like plagiarism might be the best example of secondhandedness I can think of, but I can't think of that many plagiarists. So that's could be difficult, but that's what it would refer to. And that'd be a kind that really does happen. It's not like just something that Rand came up with. It's even people recognize even lawfully that you can't plagiarize or completely
Mm,
take for yourself what's not
right.
yours. And so you could say maybe to steal intellectual property might be secondhanded because you're not using or you're acquiring something without having produced it yourself or without a trade or without acknowledging who created it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I didn't think of plagiarism, but you're right. There's a legal concept there.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is about the argument that if he lives on a desert island, he couldn't live by depending on other men. He would have to think, produce on his own, and suffer the consequences. He would have to focus on the same. And then it says, yeah, so he would have to focus on reality or perish. And it says the same principle applies when one lives in society. Um, but it says the presence of other men does not change the nature of man or the requirements of his life. But I thought, like, couldn't I argue that it does? Because the requirements of it, like, he's in a different context. So theoretically, you could say, well, um, yeah, okay, if I was on a desert island, I couldn't, there would be no men to steal from, but I'm not on a desert island now, so I can steal. I'm
Yeah.
confused at why that doesn't make, like, why would that not make sense as an argument?
That's always a complicated answer. Like that is like the a very common question I think, and I've had a hard time answering it too
Oh, okay.
over time in the past. I do know it has to do with, well, even say there were like, I don't know, 20 people on
Yeah.
the island, and you need to create a hut because you need to create shelter from a hut, and you chop down some trees, and somebody builds it, and um, it doesn't change the nature of man to say that reason must be used in some way or another to create this hut, to
Yeah.
recognize you need a hut and build it, create it, all that stuff. I mean, obviously that doesn't change if people enter the picture or not. You will still need it, even in a big city, you need shelter regardless.
Right.
Somebody needs to create it, and somebody does create it.
Yeah.
And you can ask, okay, they make it, so why not steal it? Or why not
Right.
just break in and murder them, make it yours, and that's that. Part of the problem is, to what extent could you even continue to live? I mean, could you
Mm.
find your food and whatnot? Or okay, then we could say, imagine you're just this survivalist and you are able to, and I guess that's when it gets more tricky because imagine you were able to do this on your own and you did steal it and did murder the guy. Would you be able to continue living? Which I think Rand would probably say that no, you couldn't continue living in any meaningful way because I think it's just a very difficult question. Um,
Yeah.
you would usually need to acknowledge that to survive in the best way possible usually would imply trading with them rather than murdering them.
Mm.
And that's probably easy to see. It only gets complicated, I think, when we talk about rights. So let's say that they refuse to let you in, but you don't have a shelter. What would you do? Would it be right to then, I don't know, grab a big stick, break the door down, and murder them so you have it for yourself? That would be a difficult question.
So, yeah, I didn't think of that. You've obviously thought about this before. It's funny,
Yes, I
like,
have.
because
Yeah, I've heard of that
it's
in
such an
many.
unexpected example.
Yes.
So, but it's true. I mean, that's even better than, because I kind of get like, okay, if you go in a specific scenario, island of 20 people, if you know nothing, you're just like, is it practical for me to kill someone and take their heart? Like, what are you going to do after that, right? But
Yeah.
with the example you gave, if you're on the verge of death and no one will let you in, I don't know. That's tricky, but it's interesting because it goes to, I remember I read one of her essays about altruism and she talked about the lifeboat perspective on life where like everything is a constant emergency. It is interesting that
Yes.
those are the scenarios that we go to kind of like try and find
Yeah.
a case where you must, what are you going to do? You're either going to die or you're going to kill someone or something.
I think Rand would usually respond to that something like, well, it isn't a natural state, so we're not going to derive principles from this. We're not trying to derive principles from
Right.
exceptions or
Right.
these strange scenarios. But I think it's fair to say, okay, we have our theory and we apply it to this rare exception. Can we even? I mean, maybe it all goes out the window when we get in that situation. Like if you are on the verge of death, does morality really even matter anymore? Probably not. It almost is irrelevant to you at that point. There is no moral value even in your actions anymore because you're essentially a zombie or you're acting undead. Like you're acting like if you have no life to live anymore, then I don't even think moral questions are really the right questions. It's more like how do you get in that situation to begin with, or why did this
Well,
even happen? We
I
can
think
do that.
actually when you say that, I think about when you say on the verge of death, the only way to really think about it properly is to come up with a very specific real life example. Otherwise,
Yeah,
it's floating, right? And you can
right.
say, well, if someone's on the verge of death, what do they do? And you're like, well, let's look at the actual scenario because maybe it is the case that, it totally depends on the situation. And you keep finding that even someone in a desperate state decides to, or things don't go as badly as this imagined scenario. I don't know. I'm just saying you need to think about a specific concrete, I think, to probably um, think it through properly. But I can see how this is difficult. I had difficulty with this. So
The main idea seems to be usually that by allowing people to use their rationality to make decisions, that it creates the best social condition you can, because you're allowing people to
right,
use their mind as they deem appropriate,
right,
because they need it to survive anyway. It
right,
doesn't matter even what context you're in. You still need to use reason to like say, well, how am I going to afford a house? How am I going to get a job? Or things like
right,
that. Either way, you're going to need rationality no matter how advanced your civilization is. Or you're going to have
right.
to ask, well, how do I need to treat people? How do I need to maintain my relationships? So you can
Do
still
you
ask those questions.
do you think it makes sense to think this through? In because nothing, like, I don't think we live in the perfect society where all um, rights are respected and all of that. And so a lot of these questions are interesting in the context. Like, let's say you're a leper and you live in India. Um, like, you don't have, no, everyone rejects you. Even the slums won't let you live with them. So you live with the other lepers, and they're all damaged and have problems as well. And so what do? Do you steal medicine? Because that's how you're going to survive. You can find a way to steal medicine from pharmacies, and then um, you can resell them on the black market in India. And so that, to me, that is in certain contexts where, they're rejected by society and their rights aren't respected, like, that does become, well, force is being used against you too. You're not allowed to settle anywhere. And like, so then and I think a lot of the moral concepts these virtues would need to be thought of in a context similar to that. Because every country to some extent has, whether it's through a tax code, if you run a business, there is force being used against you. So I don't really know. Yeah, I
I
mean, you'd
have
probably, yeah,
I have trouble with that one too, because even more recent times, even like the civil rights and Jim Crow, like South in the U.S. So it was like explicitly harmful and violent towards Black people, and I
right.
wonder to what extent should he be able to fight back, or to what extent is it moral, and what are the moral ways to fight back? I mean, you can't be complicit and just let it happen, clearly,
No,
but at the same time, is it appropriate to have like block the roads? I mean, you're not maybe you're not shooting everyone, but in a normal context, no, it's not appropriate to just block the road. It would be initiation of force, but it's hard to interpret that in the context of if the government really is trying to initiate force against you on a pretty broad scale, then you might want to ask, in what way does this
it's,
context change things? And it then
yeah,
gets really hard.
right. That's what I find too. And then also, it's not even if they initiate force against you, but are they enforcing your rights? Because if you I think someone in that thing I posted, uh, David said there's some people who do desperation killings, like if they don't think they're going to be protected by their government or whatever.
Yeah,
And so it does become like, yeah, if you don't, and if morality is supposed to be there to make your life better, it wouldn't make sense to be like, oh, let me just not do anything and sit here. And because then that's why the idea that evil is practical and powerful comes, because yeah, you're hamstrung or whatever, but that wouldn't make sense according to everything that's being said in here about living the best life possible. In some contexts are not conducive, or not, I don't want to say not conducive, but they're definitely disruptive and destructive in some way, right?
yeah.
So I don't know about that, but um, yeah, it's something I guess once maybe you can think about it in the perfect society first, and then you try and stretch it out to more real world examples. But clearly this is not simple, despite the
No,
overall
it's
overview here.
not. I mean, I would even be careful with the reason for the perfect society. That could be rationalistic as well. Like you
Right,
said about Lone Rod, you have your theory, and then trying to fit the evidence to that
right,
theory might not
right,
give you a good answer.
right. Yeah, maybe you do have to just start from where you're at, which is a mixed society. I know there's an article she wrote, an essay about,
Yeah,
um, but then that was just about making moral condemnation. But there's a lot in there that's not in the essay, but there's a lot more than that, I would think. Like the example you
Yes.
gave with yeah, if the government isn't enforcing your rights in some way, like what does that mean? Does it make sense for you morally to try and force them yourself, or does it make sense for you to steal from the government and then run away? Like there's probably a lot that's not, well, to me it's not clear. So yeah.
It's hard, and that is something you probably think about a lot over time. The important point, I think, is that like rights are a moral and social concept. Social in the sense that it applies to these social contexts. It's not supposed to be an absolute rule as much as in what way does it affect or serve ourselves and serve our values and serve our flourishing. And when your rights are being violated, it's worth considering like retaliating, of course, but even do the conditions even exist where rights are possible, or is everybody treated like it is a desert island? Like, or imagine there's such a extreme level of oppression like in Soviet Russia that it's hard to think about rights anymore because the conditions of human rights are like obliterated. So how do you use moral principles when life has been obliterated anyway? That's when it can get iffy. So it's not
Yeah,
absolutely clear.
I don't know. And also, like, take the example if you live in India, and maybe it's not the same as Russia, for example, or North Korea, but like, there's no, it's much harder to start a business. You have to pay a lot of bakshish or whatever to run a business. There's no, they're not going to enforce any copyrights or anything like that. And does that mean you should try and build up a gang to enforce your own copyrights? Like, there's
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, I don't know what happens to moral principles in that context. Can you even, but it also seems like it doesn't make sense to say as well that like, oh, life is impossible in that context, morality doesn't apply, because yet you do see, for example, people still even in that context benefiting from trade. They'll group together in little slums or whatever, and because there's still benefit to trade, and so there's something there. I just wouldn't know how to work it out in that context. And it seems like an important question because these aren't extremes. These are things that exist. And even in more developed countries, there are issues about the fact that your rights are frequently disrespected. So I don't know. Okay. Let's